Okay, Boker Tov, we learn Pirke Avot, Yulin Yishmat, Victor Chai Avram, Ben Rachel Leah Mer Tzvi, also for Refuah Shlema for Avigal Pesha Bat Sarah and Sarah Bat Eta, and also for Refuah Shlema for Rav Yitzchak Ben Rina. Tov. So we're going to um, enter I don't want to say a new section because we're in the middle of chapter 4, but taking into consideration the Mishnah we're going to do today and the next few subsequent Mishnayot, each one could take us a month to do easily. I'm not going to do that, but I'll probably be spending maybe a couple classes at least on them because on each one, because there are a lot of deep philosophical points that come across. One of which is probably more than all the others coming up, and I'll say that probably every single one. And that has to do with the issue of what's known as Rasha v'tovlo, tzaddik v'ralo, when good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people. But before we get to that, let's look at the Mishnah. We're in chapter 4. We're in Mishnah, depends on, again, you're printing 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. It starts with the name Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai Omer. So you want to find that. And we're going to pick up the Mishnah there. And depending on your printing, it may have just his line. It may have another statement. I'm going to read the whole Mishnah as it appears in my version. Rabbi Yanai Omer, Ein biadenu, it is not in our hands, meaning it's unable to be explained. Let me turn this off. One, please. Sorry about that. In our hands, lo mishalvata r'shaim, we cannot explain why it is that sometimes the wicked are at peace and things are good for them, or there's security. V'af lo misurei tzadikim, nor can we explain why bad things happen to tzadikim. Second half of this Mishnah has nothing to do with Rabbi Yanai, maybe. I'm going to read the other two statements. I'm going to mention something about one of them only. Rabbi Matya ben Charash Omer, Hevi Magdim b'shlom kol adam. When you pass somebody in the street, when you come into shul, when you go to somebody's house, in the store, wherever you see somebody, his idea is you should always be the first person to say, Boker Tov, Manishma, how are you? Good morning. Be the first one. There was somebody else we'll see when we get to this part of the Mishnah later in the Gemara who also was very big into that. But be the first person to say hello. He also says something that sounds like it's absolutely, positively not connected whatsoever to anything. He says, it's better to be the tail of lions, and don't be the head of a fox. Obviously, these require lots of understanding, lots of explanation. But right now, we're going to focus on the beginning of the Mishnah about what Rabbi Yanai said about basically it is beyond our comprehension to fully understand why good things happen to bad people and why bad things happen to good people. In order to understand what he says, we also need to understand a little background on Rabbi Yanai. As I've said it before, many of the Mishnah, all of them for sure, but in many of them that we've done, in order to understand why a person is quoted in the Mishnah. Now, Rabbi Yanai said probably hundreds of other things. Why is this what we are left with as far as in the Mishnah, what he said that became connected to him? So we have to understand, first of all, who he was when he lived. So it's also important to understand because when he says that we can't understand these things, he's not speaking in a philosophical, oh, this is beyond our human comprehension. He wasn't a philosopher. He's speaking one of the greatest leading Torah scholars in the land of Israel at a very turbulent time because he lives during the late second, early third century of the Common Era, which means he's a transitional period. If you remember a little background we talked about in the history of Mishnah, that approximately the year 200 is when Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi edits the Mishnah. Now he's living at that point and after. This is after the destruction of Beit HaMikdash. This is after the beginning of the Mishnah. We said that the people who lived in the Jewish history class, we also talked about this, the people who lived that time period, the rabbis were called Tanaim. The next generation, the rabbis in the Gemara are known as Amoraim. And there were a few people like this, but Rabbi Yanai was one of these bridges. He kind of straddled both of those worlds. Again, it was still right after, it was still a living memory, destruction of Beit HaMikdash. It wasn't that the people alive saw it destroyed, but their great-great-grandchildren grandparents passed it along like, my grandchildren's generation obviously was not alive during the time of the Holocaust, but they will grow up hearing about it. Unfortunately for them, it'll be already secondhand. No more by that time won't be any firsthand recollection down the road. So it's still in their memory. Romans are still dominating the country, and life was trying to rebuild itself after the destruction of Beit HaMikdash around Torah study rather than temple worship, going to Beit HaMikdash. Remember that this whole issue that occurred after the destruction of Beit HaMikdash was the Bnei Yisrael were lost. The Jews were lost because for centuries they were used to, other than for 70-year window, plus as it took time to build the second Beit HaMikdash, for hundreds and hundreds of years, their worship of Hashem and daily Jewish life revolved around Beit HaMikdash. So after it's destroyed, as I said, one of my heroes, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, helped to reestablish and perpetuate Torah Judaism. So now they had to shift their focus from Beit HaMikdash to focusing on growing closer to Hashem through Torah. So first of all, who was he as far as from whom did he learn? So his main teacher was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. You don't get better than that of the Moshe Rabbeinu. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, again, the author / editor of the Mishnah. In addition to that, Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish, was also one of his teachers as well. They served as a direct link between the time of the Tanaim and the time of the Amoraim, between the two. Unlike many names of people mentioned in the Mishnah and then in the Gemara, he himself, Rabbi Yanai, actually opened a major yeshiva in the Galil. And he's mentioned frequently in both Yerushalmi and Bavli, both the Talmuds, that the Gemara often referred to Beit Rabbi Yanai. Beit is Aramaic for Bayit or house. So just like you say, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai means the students of Shammai and the students of Hillel. So Beit Rabbi Yanai is the academy that Rabbi Yanai established, and it's the students who then perpetuated his teachings afterwards. And he taught many students who became great unto themselves. We'll talk about one of them in a moment. Actually, we'll do that now. He had a student whose name was Rabbi Yochanan. The Rabbi Yochanan that you've heard and seen in Gemara many, many times, not Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yochanan. The reason he is so critical is that according to many opinions, he is the one who edits Talmud Yerushalmi. Again, I'm not going to give the whole shir again. I gave it recently, but that there were two Talmuds growing at the same time after the Mishnah, one in Israel, mostly around Tiberia, and the other in Babylonia. He is the most apparently one of the most influential figures, Rabbi Yochanan, his student of Rabbi Yanai, in the authorship, the editing of, even though it was not well edited, of Talmud Yerushalmi, which therefore means that Rabbi Yanai helped to really influence for centuries the Talmud Yerushalmi and the learning that would come as a result. Some people say, most people don't learn. It's true, most people don't. I do, but most people don't learn Talmud Yerushalmi. But it has a very specific place in halacha when there's a dispute between Yerushalmi and Bavli. Sometimes it depends, but usually the Yerushalmi will win. So it's not like it's just some ancient archaic text that's just gathering dust. It is gathering dust in most places, unfortunately. But again, Rabbi Yochanan, because he is who he was, and Rabbi Yanai, who was his teacher, that means by direct link, Rabbi Yanai shaped the future direction of Torah learning in Eretz Yisrael. Why do his teachings matter? When Rabbi Yanai said, "Ein bi'adeinu lo mishalvat harashayim," but we don't really understand why it is. Literally means it's not in our hands, but it's beyond our comprehension that we don't understand why the evil prosper or things go well for them and vice versa. We have to remember who is speaking, and I kind of alluded to it already. We're not talking about a skeptic, someone just saying, we have no idea. It's not just being said out of the blue. He's not an outsider. We're talking about someone who doesn't lack Torah knowledge. He was a great Torah scholar. He's like probably one of the leading Torah scholars in Eretz Yisrael at that time period. But he comes to a startling conclusion, and that's where we start with this Mishnah. Some of the greatest questions of our existence remain beyond our human grasp. Now, that statement carries a tremendous weight because it comes from somebody who spent his entire life searching for answers. If someone comes to me, and I've had these discussions, I'm sure you've had these discussions yourselves amongst yourselves or with other people of why certain things happen. How is it that there was a woman who worked in, I don't remember the hospital. She was very, very popular, very loved, and respected, worked with patients who had infertility issues, and 45 years old, just dropped dead yesterday, a day and a half ago. And just I'm seeing one post after another. Such a nebuch, such a nebuch. Why? And yet some schnook who believes to be 80 years old is a terrible human being. Why? So people ask these questions. Normal. It's a normal question to answer or to ask. And many people will go, God would, and some on a very anti, let's just say, very not God appropriate type of response. God was missing. God was, busy that day. He wasn't paying attention. God forbid. That kind of answer I've heard. Others, I don't know. How are we supposed to know? And saying something like that is fine. I don't know. That's exactly what Abiyana is saying. But we're not talking about you and me, who just don't spend our whole lives searching and searching and searching and searching for answers and depth. And here's the man who was, and he comes up to the statement and says his conclusion is there's a limit to our understanding. His greatness doesn't lie just in his scholarship, but his humility. We look to the Rabbanim, we look to them for clarity. I just, someone messaged me this morning. I did something of this in the kitchen. What do? I can't say to him, listen, if you follow the Shach, you do this. If you follow the Taz, you do this. I don't remember what they said anyways off the top of my head. But they want clarity. Do I have to kasher it? Is it not kasherable? Is it not treif? Whatever it is, they need clarity. People need clarity when they ask a question. When it comes to philosophical questions, one thing we have to understand is, number one, sometimes there are no answers. I mean, there are, but they're beyond our comprehension. That's first. Rabbi Yanai reminds us that wisdom sometimes comes from knowing where certainty ends. There are certain things we're positive of, 100%, right? If you ask me, will I bet every penny I have on will the sun rise tomorrow? Bezrat Hashem, the answer is of course. I'd bet every single penny I have. Hashem himself tells us this in Parshat Noach. He's never going to stop the regular cycle of seasons and of such. Rashi, one of the greatest things he ever taught us was to say, I don't know. Rashi, who's the greatest scholar when it came to Chumash, to Tanakh in general, and to many other things, and Gemara and others, he had times where he just said, I don't know. And maybe that's why the statement about the suffering of the good people and the good things that happen to the righteous, to the bad people, still resonates to this very day. After 18 centuries later, after Rabbi Yanai made that statement, it's still a very strong statement. And sometimes we encounter, like yesterday when I read this story about this woman, it's like, what the heck? Why? Okay, we can ask. It's about it. We should understand. It's not against Jewish philosophy to say why. There's nothing wrong with asking why, but you have to understand that there is not going to be an answer that's going to satisfy you. The flip side, and I've said this, I actually posted about it recently. The flip side is when people ask a why and they tell you what they think is the answer. For example, when you have highly placed rabbinical authorities who tell you why things are going wrong right now, or why there was an accident, or why there's a tsunami, or it means you're saying I understand God. That's kfirah. I'm sorry, that's just apostasy that you can understand God. We can't understand Hashem. And that's even after a whole lifetime of trying to search for answers. Rabbi Yanai comes to that conclusion. Now, we need to go backwards now and start from the beginning, not from the Mishnah, but way, way, way before, where this whole idea of tzaddik v'ralo, rasha v'tovlo, when good things happen to bad people, where's it come from? Where's the background? So we're going to go back first to Tanakh. We're going to start with Avraham Avinu. Hashem said to Avraham that he is going to destroy Sodom. And Avraham asks a question of Hashem that becomes a Jewish theological question ad hayom hazeh, to this very day. He said to Hashem, Ha'av tispet tzadikim rasha? Are you going to allow the righteous people in Sodom to die along with the wicked? And then he continues and makes the question even more, he mechaded the question, he sharpens the question. Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat? Shall the judge of the entire earth not act justly? What's important or remarkable to mention about the way he phrases the question? Avraham Avinu assumes that God works only with justice. That's an assumption. It's automatic. The question he's asking is, how does something that it seems apparently unjust can be reconciled with divine righteousness? I'm going to say that again so it's clear, because that's really the bottom line of this entire question. On the one hand, we know Hashem is righteous. Pasuk says, Atzur tamim pa'alo, yichod rachav mishpat, el menavin, aval tzadik v'yasharu. Hashem is perfect, the rock. Hashem is perfect. Everything Hashem does is correct and right and righteous. That's also why we say, Baruch Dayan Emet. Hashem made a judgment that we don't like. Usually we're saying that for something terrible. Tragedy, we're saying for something natural. A person passes away in their 90s. It's sad, of course, but it's normal life, as opposed to, God forbid, someone in their 40s or younger when that happens. We say, Baruch Dayan Emet. We're accepting that. As a matter of fact, at a funeral, people say what is called Tziduk Hadin. We are justifying the deen. What does that mean? We're not justifying, oh yeah, God, good job. But we're saying we accept, even though we don't have to like it, but we have to understand that that's what Hashem's will was for whatever reason. So the question boils down to, how do we reconcile the concept of divine righteousness, which is perfect, with apparent injustice that we see? So I guess the real one line question would be how does God's justice operate? So, spoiler alert, we don't know. That's what Rabbi is telling us. It's Mishne, but we have to work our way to get to that. So we started off with Avraham Avinu, and we're going to move along to Moshe Rabbeinu. Gemara Brachot tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu turns to Hashem and says to him, Hodi'eni na et drachecha, let me know your ways. Lehodia is to let someone know. Ani yodea means I know. Lehodia is to let somebody know. Muda'a, like Mudat Evel is an informational piece of information about someone who passed away, all the same shorish. Hodienina et dirachecha, show me your ways. What was he asking? It sounds like he's a mystical, philosophical, deep. What's he really asking? So the Gemara tells us in Masechet Brachot, I'll read it to you. Bikesh lehodio drachav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'natan lo. Shenemar. So now it says, quotes the Pasuk. It says in the Pasuk, what is it that Moshe was asking? Says the Gemara, Amar lefanav. Moshe said to God, Ribono shel olam, mipnei ma yesh tzadik v'tov lo, v'yesh tzadik v'ra lo, yesh rasha v'tov lo, yesh rasha v'ra lo. He says, how come there's some tzadikim things go well for them, and some tzadikim things go wrong? How come for some Rishaim they have a good life, and some Rishaim things go badly? Now, this is a little bit more detailed a statement, this Gemara, than what we usually refer to as Shavet Tov Lo, Tzadik Veralo. We only say one half of that formula. In Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, the Admor Zaken, deals with this at length as to why it's spoken said like that. But for our purposes right now, we just have to understand that when he says, when Moshe Rabbeinu turns to Hashem and says, Hodi'eni na et drachecha, he's really asking, I want to understand your system of justice. Why do good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people? Who's the source of this? Who's asking this question? Right? Not you or me. It's not Rav Kook. It's not Sadia Gaon. It's not Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. It's Moshe Rabbeinu. Why is he called Moshe Rabbeinu? Why is he Moshe Avinu? Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are called the Avot. Why is Moshe called Moshe Rabbeinu? Because to be a Rav means to be our teacher. Every single thing that we learn, everything that we know, everything that we acquire, ultimately could trace back to Moshe, including how we act, how we're supposed to be as good Jews, beyond just halacha. A person can live their whole life following exactly what it says in Shulchan Aruch and still be a stinker. But we learn everything from Moshe. Now, it's this individual who reached the 49th out of 50th levels of, let's say, Kedusha, holiness, and knowledge, and as close as you can get to the divine as humanly possible. And he asked the question, I don't understand. Can you explain to me why do bad things happen to good people? It's the same question that bothers all of us. Why is it God, how did come October 7th happened and all these other things? Why the Holocaust happened? Again, spoiler alert, we know the answers. We don't know. We don't understand. But what does that do for us? Let's see. It's really important to also understand, I may have said it a different way before, but asking a question like this is not considered a weakness of a person's emunah. I will tell you 100% there are schools, teachers, people who will say, oh, you can't ask those kind of questions. Don't ask those. Hashem is perfect. We just have to follow up. Okay, yeah, they're partially right. Yeah, we have to just accept what happens in this world and have to deal with what we are given. But there's nothing wrong with asking the question. You should always, always, always be asking questions and understanding there's not always going to be a good answer. I had a conversation yesterday with a mother and her daughter. Daughter's 11 years old. And they're starting to do this whole dance about daughter wants to start wearing pants versus skirts and whatever the person's opinion is she's asking me for assistance. I talked with her and her daughter yesterday, and her question was phrased as follows. Where in the Torah does it say I have to dress tsanua? It wasn't an attack. She says, I want to understand this. So, of course, I responded like a good Jew with a question. Where does it say what tefillin look like? Where does it say how to make tzitzit? Where does it say how to build a sukkah? And then we talked about not everything's in the Torah. We did talk about from Micha. There's a whole bunch of stuff. But I start off by telling you this. It's very good that you asked the question. That's the whole point. I don't care if you're challenging, like even if you're challenging with the eyes rolling to the back, she did, with the eyes rolling to the back of your head or the shoulder, whatever it might be. It's always important to ask, and especially questions of faith. There's nothing wrong. It does not show lack of emunah. What does show, though, is if a person says, I don't understand it and I don't like it, that's fine. You don't have to. But obviously Hashem is unjust. That's already no good. Because we say, that's Surah Tamim Paulo. That's the pasuk that's said by a Levaya, in many cases, not all, where we accept Hashem's mishpat. That's the way it is. So it's not a question of a person's emunah when they come up with something like this. The problem probably has the most emotionally powerful expression, though, in Ayin Gimel, chapter 73 of Tehillim. And some of you might be thinking, what about Eov? What about Book of Job? We're going to get to him shortly. In Eov, there's a pasuk where Asaph says, Va'ani kimat natayu raglai. My feet had almost stumbled. Why? Ke'ayin shuvchu ashurai. Ki kuneti beholalim shlom reshaim ereh. As for me, my feet had almost strayed. My steps were nearly let off course. For I envied the wanton. I saw the wicked at ease. His faith is not shaken by intellectual arguments, but by observation. He's seeing the reality right in front of his face. He looks around. He sees people who are not good people, and things are happening very good. They're prospering. We all know people like that. Not necessarily Russia, not necessarily evil. But to be a Russia it's not easy. It takes some work to be a Russia. But people who are not the best, they don't keep Torah mitzvot. Doesn't mean they're Rishayim. They don't keep Torah mitzvot. They do all kinds of things they shouldn't be doing. But people who are cheating and stealing and whatever it might be, they're not living a good life. Right? So it's a big question. We see it in front of our own eyes. And the turning point comes when Asaph enters the Beit HaMikdash. It says, Ad avo el mikdashei ke'el avina la'acharitam. Until I entered the sanctuaries of God, then I understood their end. What does that mean? The Tehillim doesn't offer a detailed philosophical explanation. This is why things happen good to bad people, but it offers something much greater, and that is perspective. Standing in Hashem's presence changes the lens through which reality is seen. I want to expand on that a little bit. And it's not a digression because it's exactly this, but it's going to sound like a digression. And that is we're going to go over for a couple of minutes to what's called the Igeret HaKodesh. Igeret HaKodesh is a continuation of what we know generally as Tanya. Tanya is made up of more than just the volume called Tanya. There's also the Igeret HaKodesh and there's Igeret HaTshuva and all kinds of amazing stuff that the Admor Zaken, Shlomo Zalman of Liadi, wrote in the late 1700s, which became the Bible, in quotes, of Chabad. And in Igeret number 12, now these are letters that were written by the Alter Rebbe, Admor Zaken, in many cases to be used for when Jews would go to collect funds for the land of Israel and encouraging people in the importance of tzedakah. And in letter number 12, he discusses a concept that you are already somewhat familiar with. You'll see in a moment, but until we get to it, it'll take a minute. He talks about the pasuk of, this is a tiny little glimpse of what's coming up for Shabbat Shuvah this year, by the way. Yes, I think way in advance. Talks about the pasuk, Oseh shalom b'mromav v'yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol amo Yisrael. He who makes peace in the heavens should make peace here for us on this world. And he asks a very simple question. What does he make peace in heaven for? What are the angels fighting? This one's sitting too close to me. He put my wing next to my food. What exactly is going on? So he talks about two malachim, whose names you know, Michael and Gavriel. Michael represents chesed. He's associated with water, like pure stream, like a rolling brook. Gavriel represents gevurah, strength, might, represented by esh, by fire. And obviously fire and water literally don't get along. And we know that he made peace between the two of them, because we know that when Hashem sent the plague of Barad, of hail, into Mitzrayim, that it was a mixture, Rashi tells us, of ice, which is water, of course, and fire. They made peace. Okay, that's nice for that, like a sixth grade understanding, but we're not in sixth grade. We're a lot older now. So it has to be something even greater than that. So as Mozakin goes on to explain, he gives a mashal. Imagine you have two people that work as ministers for the government. And I'm not going to use this as an example. And it's not a government, it's a monarchy, but he has ministers. One minister is in charge of PR, wants to make sure the king looks good. One minister is in charge of taxes. One minister is in charge of housing. And they couldn't hate each other's guts more. They don't get along. How can you raise taxes? What says the PR guy, because it's going to hurt PR. The PR guy says, the tax guy said, how can you not build, how do you not add the cost in with the, and they're all fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And then they get called into the king. Now, to stand in the king's presence, it's not that they made peace. Is that being in the presence of the king, they understood that their goal is to serve that king. And when they understand they're standing in the presence, that is the equalizer, understanding where they were. Oseh shalom b'mromav does not mean he said, okay, guys, look, you, Mr. Fire, and you, Mr. Water, let's get along. Come on, why can't we all get along? It's not that. It was the understanding that being in Hashem's presence made everyone equal. There's no more fighting. There's no more disagreement. There's no more argument. There's no more fire and water that don't get along. It's not that they do get along, so there's no issue anymore. And that's what we come back to here, is the same idea that he had these philosophical questions. Asaf did, and Avraham Avinu did, and Moshe Rabbeinu did. But the bottom line is, Susan, when they come to the understanding that they're standing in this world, they're standing for Hashem, they can't understand. It's Hashem's, we say this pasuk that says, Ki lo machshavotai machshavotechem. My thoughts are not like your thoughts. What does that mean? It doesn't mean God thinks differently. Again, this is definitely beyond today's shiur. We're not going to go into it, but it's much more than just Hashem thinks differently, that it's where our seichel and our knowledge is separate from us, and it's part of Hashem. We can't even begin to fathom how Hashem thinks. Someone made a great point. I don't remember who it was, said, you look at some of the unbelievable things that human beings have been able to accomplish. Just take a look in the area of math and science and the genius that some people come up with. What we forget is who's behind the genius, who's behind that math, and who's behind the science of what was created. That's Hashem. So if we consider the person as this unbelievable genius, take someone like Einstein, what a mind, what a genius, what he was able to accomplish in his life. Stephen Hawking, whatever you want to think about him, anti-Semitism-wise, but there's still a genius there. They're, one in a billion type of person. There's a new woman, I don't remember where, in the United States, I think it was, who they're saying is the next Einstein. We forget that genius that they have discovered was created by Hashem. And the same thing is true with everything in the world. And we have to understand there's some things that are beyond our comprehension. Yirmiyahu himself also, he says it pretty straightforward. Madua derech rishayim slecha. Why is it that the paths of the evil people are successful? Why do they prosper? Yirmiyahu but starts off the pasuk before he asks the question with the statement, Tzaddik ata Hashem. You are righteous, God. The question is how, again, like we said, now we're starting to see it over again, that it's not just, is Hashem unjust, chas v'shalom, but Hashem is just. That's our starting off point. But then we have to go to the question of, if that's the case, how do we reconcile that with what we see with our own eyes? Ultimately, of course, that now leads us to Sefer Iyov, or the book of Job. By the way, there's a dispute in the Gemara if Iyov actually lived, he was a person, and all these things in the Sefer Iyov actually occurred in the discussions with his friends, tried to comfort him, or it was just one long mashal or parable. I don't know the answer to that. The book of Iyov, if you have not learned it, can be very depressing. Just as a real tiny little background to it, Hashem, so to speak, makes a deal with the devil. The devil said he can get anybody to sin, and Hashem says, "Well, have you seen my servant Iyov? He's like completely dedicated to me." So he says, "Yeah, because he's got all kinds of good stuff. He's got a family, he's got lots of money, he's got fields." I said, "You give me, I tell you what, you give me the right to do things to him, except to take his life. I can guarantee you he's going to sin against you. He's going to blaspheme you. He's going to go against you." Hashem said, "Deal, you're on." And he takes everything away from him. There are midrashim that say that the family members who passed away came back to life again and all, but again, that's not for today. So he takes everything away from him. He becomes horrible pain, and his money's gone, his fields are gone, his family dies off. He takes everything the Satan takes everything away from Iyov except his own life. And then along the way, he has a few friends who come to try to console him and comfort him. Some don't do a very good job, saying, "Well, if all this happened to you, you must have done something wrong in your life." By the way, if you think that that's never said, I've actually heard that said to people. Something real bad happened in their family, not a death. And so, well, obviously you did something wrong to deserve this. Like, how do you say that to somebody? How do you even think that way? It's horrible. In any case, here Iyov is known as the man who was tam v'yashar. He was upright, he was righteous. And again, he loses his children, his wealth, his health, his standing. And these friends come to try to explain, in quotes, his suffering. And they try this. It's a very long book. You get to the end. Hashem now speaks up. And he doesn't endorse any of their explanations whatsoever. But all he does is to, so to speak, reveal the complexity of creation. The message of Sefer Iyov is that the reality is much larger than human capacity to understand. The way sometimes I try to explain that idea is the following. Let's say you take an ant, a nimala, little baby ant, that understands English. Somehow we get the ant speaks English, or we speak ant. And that's all they know. They understand words. And now you take them and you bring them to someplace in Silicon Valley in California. You try to explain to them the idea of what a terabyte of information is, what a supercomputer is. And like, they could sit there for a trillion years. They'll have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. It's beyond their comprehension. Same idea here is beyond our comprehension. And what we're coming to the point now to understand, and I'm going to stop with this today a little bit early, is Rabbi Yannai's statement is not the beginning of a conversation. His statement is a conclusion. It began with Avraham, went to Moshe, went to Asaph, went to Yirmiyahu, went to Sefer Iyov, and after all of that, after all these people and all these centuries, Rabbi Yannai tells us, listen, I got news for you. I've searched, I've learned, I've done everything I can. There's no way we can understand. Hashem is just. Whatever Hashem does is righteous, even though we don't have to like it. But at the same time, we cannot explain why. It's beyond our comprehension. How this affects us and what did we do with that, how does it connect to the rest of this particular Mishnah, we'll see Bezrat Hashem next week. Actually, not next week, in 2 weeks. Next week is fast day. Again, I could potentially teach, but I never know how I'm going to feel. So we'll just take a pass and move to the following week, Bezrat Hashem. In the meantime, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and see you, Bezrat Hashem. Thanks very much for being here this morning.